started. Hey, Scott.
Hey, John. Sorry I'm late.
No problem. I'm just jumping into lightning talk. Is there anything you want to announce before I jump into it?
Nope. You're
Nope.
good. Thanks, man.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So tonight's talk is sponsored by nopCommerce. And matter of fact, I mentioned I was going to be giving a lightning talk in general about nopCommerce. And they also offered a $50 giveaway for an Amazon gift card. So at the end of this, I'll share my email in the chat. That way you can basically send me an email if you want to be part of the $50 gift card drawing, and I will draw a winner by tomorrow and post the first name of the person in the meetup itself, and of course respond to the person that you're the winner. So I'll put that info in the chat. So nopCommerce, we're going to go through what it is, and when it comes to a developer perspective, we're going to look at some aspects of the code base itself. And I think more importantly, I think it's good to look at something like nopCommerce to really understand what the value of open source really is. So let's see. Sure, there we go. So what is nopCommerce? nopCommerce is a ASP.NET Core open source solution that's pretty much based on the Microsoft stack. And we're going to walk through some of this architecture here. But first, it's always good to see what it looks like out of the box. So it's an e-commerce solution where the storefront, I think, is kind of your typical e-commerce solution, what you would see out of the box. It's also responsive, which is what you can see on the right-hand side as well. And the administrator itself, when it comes to working with the different products and orders, whatnot within nopCommerce, is a pretty clean interface, and nopCommerce is also made up to where you handle just different topics that you post on the various pages, as well as blogs and things like that. So here's a lot of different features that are within this solution. So nopCommerce has been around a little over, coming up on 12 years here. So a couple of years after they were released in 2010, they had about 5,000 active sites. In 2011, that's when they released their 2.0 version. That's when they went from a web forms technology to an ASP.NET MVC technology. Then in 2013, that's where they had a pretty big release with their 3.0 version, where they implemented some pretty big features of having multiple stores and multiple vendor support. And when they released their 4.0 version, that's when they started to prepare for .NET Core. So their 4.0 version, they prepared all their code, but they didn't actually compile to .NET Core until the 4.1 version. And as noted on their About Us page, at the point of September 2019, they have 60,000 active websites running on nopCommerce. Now, I know a year before that, they had posted that they only had 30,000 active websites. So the growth trajectory of nopCommerce it's grown pretty strong. So it's been around over 10 years, but they've had a pretty strong growth within the last couple of years. So the various features that make up nopCommerce, they're probably what you expect again when it comes to a storefront. So having a really solid checkout experience and providing ways to where you can offer you can have different payment methods through a plugin model and shipping features and handling tax. So there's a lot of things at the core of this product that make it extensible for having all those different options. The tech stack itself is, I would say, from a .NET developer perspective, it's kind of what you would expect. However, the product does keep evolving. On the front end, they're still doing a lot with jQuery and Razor View engines. There's a lot of talk right now what they might go to next. Even Blazor's getting thrown out there, what could be done. And they have moved to ASP.NET Core, SQL Server on the back end, which they also now support MySQL. And they were using Entity Framework. They recently switched out Entity Framework. When it comes to looking at this architecture, though, it's probably best to look at the different technologies and the different swim lanes of the application layer, business layer, and data access layer. But that's where it'll highlight more of other libraries that that are good to be aware of, such as AutoFact and the Fluent Validation, even AutoMapper. So not only are they an open source solution, but they also utilize a lot of other open source libraries to make up that solution. So nopCommerce itself, just what I like about it most, it just keeps on evolving. I got involved in this product, probably around the 3.6, 3.7 version. And it's been nice to see that, for example, if you go back, let's say, to the 3.9 version and go into the 4.0 version, that's where they moved the .NET Core when it comes to, they started preparing for it. However, they still compiled to the 4.6.1 framework at the time. And when they moved from 4.0 to 4.1, that's when they actually compiled to .NET Core. When they moved from 4.1 to 4.2, that's when they started supporting actually truly running on Linux and within Docker containers. And then most recently, in moving from version 4.2 to 4.3, they also switched compiling to .NET Core 3.1, and they refactored their data access because part of that was to support other data stores. So, and you'll see that MySQL is one of those data stores. We'll look a little bit like how they even went through that effort. And when it comes to moving or what they're doing for 4.4, they're pretty public about what they're working towards. So if you check out their GitHub site and just look at the repository and the issues there, it gives you a good sense of what's coming. In version 4.4, they're going to be working towards supporting Postgres as well as MongoDB. And it looks like they're going to be not compiling to 3.1, but they're actually going to go ahead and compile to .NET 5.0. All right, so let's kind of dig into the architecture a little bit by looking at the solution itself, and we'll touch on a little bit how you can create plugins and customize with themes. So the solution, you have these three basic libraries that kind of make up a lot of aspects. So you got nop.core, nop.data, and nop services. And things are pretty well segregated for the purpose of those different libraries. Nop.web is where the storefront, as well as the administrator, where that project resides. And you have this other project, nop.web.framework, which is kind of like that common library for a lot of UI aspects for nop.web. In previous versions, the administrator was a separate project from nop.web. So they had this common library, and that's why that project library exists. But now it's just one particular website. There's a handful of unit test projects that are in there. And out of the box, there's a good handful of sample plugins, more than just samples, really a lot of their popular plugins, such as PayPal and a few other ones, shipping with UPS, that come out of the box. They have a lot more free plugins out on GitHub underneath their site, as well as other vendors do, and they have a marketplace as well. So the architecture that makes up nopCommerce, on the web side, it's your standard MVC architecture to where like a user makes a request to the controller will instantiate a model. The model is going to return a view, which has the view as a reference to that model. So your typical MVC architecture is what takes place on the front end. And nop services is really geared for the business logic. So the controller is going to work with something called a service, a factory, something that's going to work with whatever logic, and it's going to work with domain entities that'll then get filled into the model itself. Now that service has to get its data from somewhere, in which the repository pattern is implemented within this solution architecture to where it'll go through the library nop.data for the repository. And there is this thing called the domain mapper. They actually recently changed it to being called a builder when they refactored a lot of the data access. But nonetheless, it's a mapper of sorts that will then populate the entities themselves. So there's not duplicate entities that can take place throughout this architecture. There's a lot of reuse of handling data getting passed around. But the separation of concerns of this architecture is pretty well done for an out-of-box solution. So let's look at some code here. So in looking at some data access code, and there's a reason I kind of picked on this code. So if we look at this particular get customer by ID, which is the customer service, so it's in the service layer, and it's going to do a pass through in a way to get the customer by ID. So it's working with an interface, an iRepository interface of type customer, which is a very common programming pattern when it comes to creating repositories, where you have this contract of this iRepository interface. So if we take a closer look at that interface, we'll see that iRepository type T, there's methods of like get by ID that you would implement, insert, update, delete. So a lot of these CRUD aspects of working with that domain would then be implemented for something that's inheriting this interface. Well, Entity Framework is what was used in version 4.2 and earlier. So if we looked at the EF repository, And we look at that code, we see that get by ID is implemented by doing an entities.find. Matter of fact, a lot of times you'll even see comments within the code, within open source code, which is actually fine by me. But the one thing I really kind of want to point out here is that if we look at this EF repository a little bit closer, we also see that we have this table property, in which this table property is really just pointing to the entities collection of type IDB set, which a lot of us are familiar with when it comes to the interface IDB set, when it comes to entity framework directly. So when I saw this implementation, I found it kind of interesting all these years of looking at nopCommerce. So if we go back into the service layer and we see this method, get customer by GUID, and we see what looks like a link query, could be against entity framework directly, but it's more like a link to objects type query, in which you have this table property exposed. So in theory, even though, for the past so many versions, they utilized entity framework, the architecture was designed in such a way to where in the service layer, they're doing a projection of the query to whatever's implementing this interface. And entity framework was designed to implement this interface. So what they were able to do is, if we look back at the overall technology stack, where we had entity framework and where they wanted to, just not be so tied to entity framework, the decision they made was pretty good, actually, to where now they're using link to DB as their ORM, and entity framework is no longer being used in nopCommerce. And that was because they did find some performance gains when it came to working with MySQL and moving forward with other data access aspects. And it's really just the performance was there, and also the migration patterns. They're using another third-party library for that. So they're not using the entity framework migrations as well. So link to DB, it's one of those ORMs. It's kind of right in between what entity framework is and what you'd find in these different micro ORMs, such as Dapper and Petapoka. I think their website says a lot for for what their niche is. And it was an architecture aspect that has paid off for nopCommerce for them to keep evolving and moving forward. And I've just seen a lot of decisions that they continue to make to be the right decisions. And they just keep evolving. They keep making things better. So there is a marketplace for nopCommerce. It's worth checking out. There's a lot of free stuff out there. There's definitely paid for stuff. So, there's vendors putting out various plugins and themes, extensions, and so on. You can get more information if you looked at a Pearl site as a course. I think they just deprecated this one because the course was getting outdated, but nonetheless, this was actually a really good course on walking through plugin development. One thing I got from that course is a good sense of where themes come into play versus where plugins come into play. So themes are really about the front end itself, and plugins is where you're handling business logic, just different, data manipulation. You can either have your plugin create a table for things to get managed within nopCommerce through migrations. So you can do some pretty powerful things when it comes to creating plugins around this software. And the themes themselves, you can have a lot of control on the UI. Installing a theme is actually really simple. You're just putting a certain folder in place and following the pattern of the rest of the site. So yeah, the pattern of creating plugins and themes, if you understand the overall architecture pretty well, then jumping in and creating the different things to extend it is pretty natural. Wrapping this up, by the way, I did say this is a 15-minute overview. I am a developer. I'm one of those optimistic developers that, even though I said 15 minutes, probably going to be 45. But seriously, we only have a few more minutes to wrap up here. So what the real value of open source is for this is that I really find that when it comes to, people trying to understand full stack development, just nopCommerce is a really good product to check out if you're kind of new to software development, and even just trying to understand .NET development. It's a great, nopCommerce is great for a secondary income. We'll talk a little bit about that, but most importantly, I think it's a great reference architecture, and that's one thing I'll wrap up with. So when it comes to being a full stack developer, you see these different tracks a lot of times. So like become a Java full stack developer, become a .NET full stack developer, or maybe just purely JavaScript. So there's a lot of different approaches on being a full stack developer. And in being a full stack developer, you're kind of more of a generalist. So I don't think anybody has a real strong definition around what being a full stack developer is, but you are expected to do front end, back end, database development, DevOps for like automation aspects, and even mobile nowadays when it comes to calling yourself a full stack developer. So, there's three different things that I advise when it comes to if you're really kind of wanting to call yourself a full stack developer. You really need to choose a stack, a learning platform, because you always feel like you don't know enough, and choose a solution. You need to have a solution that you really look at a lot. So choosing a stack, there's the Microsoft.NET stack. Choose a learning platform. Pluralsight is a really good one to select. They have a lot of content out there. And when it comes to an open source solution in the .NET realm, by far, I think nopCommerce is a great one to check out. So of all the different stacks, there's the Microsoft stack, and that's kind of how I look at it. Not so much the .NET stack, but a lot of times these stacks are really driven by companies when it comes down to it, and their guidance and what they're supporting first, it kind of shows. So where you have like the .NET stack for Microsoft, the Java stack with Oracle, and I call it the Go stack with Google, and a lot of different aspects they're putting in place there. Then, of course, you do have this community stack where no one really owns it per se, and it just takes a little bit more work to kind of pull together the pieces to the puzzle that you're trying to solve. The different learning platforms, I recommend something like Pluralsight. LinkedIn Learning is great also, but having a subscription thing like Pluralsight that's like a Netflix type subscription, I just recommend something like that because you're probably going to use it more. You'll feel more obligated to watch the content. All right, so when it comes to open source solutions, to really move this along, you have WordPress, which is by far one of the most popular ones still out there, with WooCommerce as an add-in for e-commerce sides of things. You have Magento. They're still pretty strong when it comes to e-commerce as well and open source. Since they got bought by Adobe, I believe there's fewer things that they now offer open source. I'm not really sure, but this might be worth checking out. Broadleaf is a open source solution within the Java space. But when it comes to .NET developers, there's a good handful of open source solutions to look at. And again, nopCommerce, in comparison to Embraco, Orchard, even VertoCommerce and .NET Nuke, they kind of stand out more for me than these other ones. And basically, the opportunities that you really find, not only just with nopCommerce, but with other solutions that are out there, there is a marketplace. You can sell plugins and themes if you choose to do that. You can also get certified. So if you wanted to actually kind of focus on that space and do work for nopCommerce, you can get that certification. You can apply the software. You can set up a drop shipping site or even set up for some downloadable content. And the one thing I really just want to kind of highlight when it comes to the real opportunity of open source as a developer in the job market, you really need something for yourself. So when it comes to, job interviews, let's say you're getting interviewed and you're getting asked, about your various experiences. A lot of times you're going to refer to your current job or previous jobs, and you might be, unknowingly disclosing some secrets that maybe you shouldn't do, or you might actually be talking bad about your previous employers. There's also the other aspect where you have your own open source solution, and you're talking about, how great your new ORM is, and they might be thinking, well, you might be wanting to implement that here, and they may not be so crazy about that. There is this third option that, you could have a reference architecture, an open source reference architecture, one of your choice, such as nopCommerce, that you have something to talk about. So when you're asked, what's dependency injection look like, or what does a plugin model look like, and how would you design that? You have this architecture, this enterprise level architecture that you can use for discussions, for interviews, to really share what you know without kind of giving away, too much of what you've done at your day job. So I highly recommend for your career, find a reference architecture. And in the .NET space, I think nopCommerce is probably the best one to check out. So download it today. Highly recommend it. Check it out. It's a great architecture. Their 4.3 version that was released a couple months ago, it is their fastest version. They now support MySQL and compiles the .NET Core 3.1. At a recent nopCommerce Global Meetup. We did a walkthrough of, or I did a walkthrough of what's new in version 4.3, and afterwards had a Q&A with the founder, Andre. So that one's worth checking out. And overall, there's this fairly new. We started this global virtual meetup for nopCommerce a few months ago, and we meet the third Tuesday of every month. So I highly recommend checking that out. We bring out a little over 100 people for each time. We record the meetups. So whether you're new to nopCommerce or been using it for a while, it brings in quite a few people. And I was up at Redmond. I gave a walkthrough on the overall platform a little bit more. You can check that out. It's on Microsoft Channel 9's YouTube channel. And to wrap this up, email me if you have any questions about nopCommerce whatsoever. I kind of entertain quite a few different topics from people reaching out, but nonetheless, go to nopcommerce.com to check out more. I will be launching the Nop Academy sometime this fall when it comes to different courses that I'm offering. But more importantly, go to Nop Docs. They have great documentation. NopTube will take you to the YouTube channel directly, and Nop Meetup will take you to the Meetup page, so you can join that. So you can feel free to email me for a copy of the presentation. If you want to even give a talk at this meetup or the nopCommerce meetup, send me an email for that. Overall, questions, whatnot about nopCommerce, send me an email. And more importantly for tonight, I'll put my email in the chat. That way you can email me for the $50 drawing for the Amazon gift card. So I wasn't really following any questions. Oh yeah, looks like I answered one of them when it comes to what did they replace any framework with, and it was linked to DB. So I am going to turn that off. And Jonathan, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. So I'm gonna
it
go ahead.
Got dark here, so it's like it's kind of emo. Very.
All right. So Jonathan, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce you a little bit here, and then I'm gonna start monitoring the chat because I think that's gonna get kind of busy. So I would say, not to embarrass you too much, Jonathan, but I would say when it comes to, because I've been doing contract work for a little over 10 years, and you become pretty much that voice in my head of anything I look at business-wise. I'm always thinking, what will Jonathan do? Nice. So I kind of discovered you and your work about 5 years ago, and yeah, highly recommend the book. I'm gonna say it right now before everybody hears what you have to say. Highly recommend the book, Hourly Billing is Nuts, and as well as your podcast, the one that you do every week with Rochelle, The Business of Authority. Highly recommend all of that. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, Jonathan. I'm gonna be quiet and monitor the chat for you.
Great. Thanks so much, John. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everybody for coming tonight. I'm super excited to talk about hourly billing being nuts and what you can do instead, and what's wrong with it, and ways to possibly transition to it. We can. I would love to do keep the presentation a little bit on the short side and handle most of the sort of help in Q&A in the chat. But yeah, I'm going to run through some overview, some bullet points, and sort of give you the lay of the land, what my worldview is about this, and just like take questions until John kicks us off. Okay, so I am a former software developer. So like you, I coded by the hour. I wasn't a .NET developer. I was always sort of a JavaScript and PHP and FileMaker guy way back. And I was in early 2000s, right around 2005, actually, it came to a culmination. I was the VP of a dev shop, and we had about 10 developers. And we billed ourselves out by the hour. I think at the time it was $150 an hour. That was our rate. And I was like, things go up and down. You get feast famine cycles in that kind of a business. And at one point I was like, if I had to let somebody go, who would it be? If we had a really tight month or a tight season. And I sort of got into this thought experiment, and my natural assumption was initially that we would let go our youngest guy, the sort of most junior developer. But when I got to start thinking about it, I was like, well, on the high end, we've got this guy, I'll call him Fred, And he was making, about $100,000 a year, $100,000 a year. And he was super fast, amazing developer, wrote quality code, didn't have to do any rework, hardly ever had to refactor anything. And he was so good that we would have a hard time keeping him busy, giving him enough work to keep him on the clock billing hours. And then on the other end, we had a sort of a junior developer, kind of like an intern, I'll call him Barney. And Barney was really slow. He didn't know what he was doing. He was a great guy. He had a great bedside manner. Clients loved him, but it took him forever to do stuff. He had to do it 3 and 4 times. And we were billing him out at the same amount. So we had these 2 developers. One were paying almost $100,000 and the other were paying about half that. And the junior developer, Barney, was making us way more money than the good developer, Fred. And I couldn't like reconcile that in my head. I was thinking about it for literally for weeks. I was like, wait a second. Maybe I'll do some gymnastics in my mind. Well, Fred's so good. He helps other developers. He makes all of our developers better. So maybe that's why he's worth so much money. But then I was like, well, wait a second. If all of our developers get better, they're all going to become less profitable. We should have worse developers. And I just couldn't live with this. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. We were lucky to have Fred. He was one of the best developers I've ever met. He still is. And we were lucky to have him. He could work anywhere he wanted, and we were happy to have him, but we were almost losing money on him. We were probably breaking even on him. So it took me a long time. I sort of like went into the desert, and I was like, how am I going to figure this out? Because I was the VP. So my job was, I reported directly to the owner, and my job was to write proposals for new projects. So I was doing hourly estimates for new projects, and then I would assign projects to developers, and then I would whip the developers to get their hours in at the end of the week so that they would get into our hourly billing system so that they could go out on an invoice on Monday, and then the clients would get the invoice, and sometimes they'd say, well, how come it took so long to do this change last week and it didn't take as long the week before? So we'd be fighting about hours, and then we'd go over hours estimates a lot of times, and it was like fighting about hours. So I was like, what is wrong here? And eventually it occurred to me in a flash, it felt like I almost got dizzy, that the problem is that we were billing by the hour. If we were not billing by the hour and we were giving some sort of fixed prices, an actual price instead of an estimate, imagine that. If we were giving a price instead of an estimate, all of our problems as a firm would evaporate. We'd have some new problems that we'd have to deal with, but all of our old problems would evaporate, all of them. And it's funny because a lot of the problems, the symptoms of this hourly billing disease that I recognized from the sort of spot I was sitting, I didn't see them as connected until I realized that the source of the problem was the hourly billing. And if we changed that and actually stood behind our prices instead of giving this wishy-washy, maybe it'll be $100,000 thing, all of a sudden I was like, it clicked into place. All of a sudden Fred becomes our most profitable developer by a mile, and everything fell into place for me. So once I saw this, I couldn't unsee it. So I went to the owner, who was my friend then and my friend now, we're still friends. And I said, look, I just had this realization. I explained to him what I just said to you guys. And he was like, okay, I see what you're saying in theory, but how would we actually transition to it? And perhaps to his credit, or maybe even mine, I was like, I don't really know, and I'll probably screw it up, but I couldn't go back to billing by the hour. So I decided to put my money where my mouth was, and I went solo and started January 1st, 2006. I started a dev shop, just myself. It was a solo consultancy. And I immediately started with value pricing, which is a way to calculate fixed prices, one way to calculate fixed prices for a project. And instantaneously, the very first year, I had just a dramatic, I doubled my income. But more importantly, the quality of life was dramatically better. It completely transformed the client relationship. There was no more this like fighting about this hour or that hour, or charging somebody an hour to argue about 30 minutes on an invoice or anything like that. It was all of a sudden we were both on the same side of the table, and we just wanted to get this thing done well as quickly as possible. It was a dramatic improvement in my quality of life. And every year after, it's just gotten better. So so I'm a huge fan. Now I say I'm on a mission to rid the world of hourly billing. I think it's a cancer on professional services. My background is in software development, so I mostly work with people in the software space to help them transition away from hourly billing into some kind of pricing. It could be value pricing or a bunch of other things we're going to talk about today. But stop billing for your time and start pricing your work, and it'll have a dramatic transformative effect on your business. Okay, so I want to go into a couple of things that are especially bad about hourly billing. Like, what's really so bad about hourly billing? Everybody does it. How bad could it be, right? So I don't see it like that. Hourly billing to me it's a vestige of an earlier time, like scientific management, industrial revolution. We're in a knowledge business now, and it doesn't make sense. It's kind of organically oozed into our space and other knowledge worker spaces, but it doesn't make sense. So here are some problems with it. There's tons, but I'll give you three. One is it misaligns the financial incentives between you and your clients. To put that another way, the longer it takes you to do the project, the better it is for you financially. Yes, you'll be fighting with them emotionally about like the budget going over or whatnot, but financially you make more if you're slower. I don't like that. That is the opposite of what the client wants. The client wants things done faster. If they could be done instantly, they'd be happier. They don't want to spend a year. People pay more for rush service, and they'll do the same for you. Another thing that I don't like about hourly billing is that it allows you to start working, start that meter running, start collecting money from the client before you even know what their goal is. So they can come to you and say, hey, you do .NET, we need you to implement this theme for nopCommerce and da-da-da-da-da-da. And they give you this punch list of things. They give you an order. Take our order, person. Do our bidding. Do this list of things that we want you to do. And you're like, okay, I know how to do that. And you go out and you're good at what you do. You employ best practices and you do everything the right way and you refactor out all of the junk and you keep it dry and all of these things that you do. But you don't know if you're actually improving their business because you don't know what they're trying to improve. So if you, like the example, I was in a web developer background, so you could look at somebody's website and it would be garbage, just a total dumpster fire. And they would say, hey, we understand you're an amazing web developer. Can you fix our website? Can you improve our website? Can you make our website better? And I'd look at the website a web developer would look at the website and they would say, yeah, this is a mess. I can make this way better. But you don't actually know, if you don't ask, you don't actually know what they think is wrong with it. They might think the disgusting, ugly design is fine, and what really the problem is that on mobile, their bounce rate is way too high, or their cart abandonment is way too high, or maybe they think their page load time is too slow, or maybe, who knows, or maybe they're not getting enough traffic to it. If you don't drill in before you start working and figure out what their success criteria is, what is the future state that they're looking for, you have no business charging them any money until you find out what they're trying to do to improve their business and what your contribution to that is. You have no business taking their money. If you're a professional and you're an expert and you're good at what you do, you owe it to them to pump the brakes a little bit at the beginning and say, look, what are we trying to accomplish here? Yes, I can redo your Shopify site. I can build it in nopCommerce or whatever. Yes, I can do that. But why? What are you trying to achieve? Another thing that is really bad with hourly billing is that it punishes expertise. We saw this in the Fred and Barney story. The better you get, the faster you get, the more efficient you get, the more productive you get, the less money you make. It doesn't make sense. It's nuts, as they say. You don't want to make less money as you get better. You want to make more money as you get better. That seems fair, right? Okay, so those are three basic things that are wrong with hourly billing, but I want to give you the big, giant, self-serving one. The big, giant, self-serving reason that hourly billing is nuts is that it puts an artificial ceiling on your annual income. Why would you do that? There are only so many hours in the year. If you are going to bill by the hour, you have a hard maximum on how much money you can make. If you're going to increase it at all, it's going to be a very small increase, a linear increase. What if you had to double your income for 2021? You wanted to double your income from 2020 to 2021. You cannot do that with hourly billing. There's only three things you could try. The first thing you could try is to work twice as much. You probably think you're already working too much. And even if you did work twice as much, that's not sustainable. Eventually you would burn out and then you'd have to take 3 months off and you'd be right back where you started in the hourly trap. The second thing you could do is you could double your hourly rate. The problem with this is when you have an hourly rate, you're giving your potential clients a meaningful differentiator between you and your competition. So if you don't have a different meaningful differentiator between you and the next person, they're going to pick the cheaper one. So it makes it harder for you to close deals if you go from charging $200 an hour overnight to charging $400 an hour. Your new clients are going to be like prospective clients are going to say, how are you charging $400 an hour? No thanks. We're going to go with someone else. And your existing clients are going to be like, wait a second, yesterday you were $200 an hour and now you're $400 an hour? I don't think so. We could hire 3 people for that amount on TopTal or something like that. So it makes it really hard to close deals if you double your hourly rate. So that's the second way you could try and double your income. The third way is to hire a whole bunch of juniors. And you probably need at least 6 to actually double your hourly because you've got to pay them and you're only making a margin off of their hours. You're going to have to train them. You're going to have to find them. You're going to have to onboard them. You're going to have to fire them. You're going to have to, and replace them. You're going to have one-on-ones. You're going to become a manager. So if you want to become a manager and you think you're going to be a great boss and you want to build a big firm of .NET developers or whatever it is that you do, you can dramatically increase your income. That is a viable approach, but only if that's what you want. You want to build a big team. Normally, when I talk to developers, they don't want to be a manager. They want to do .NET. They want to write code. They don't want to be this person who's like now has to fire people. Like that's not necessarily fun. If it is what you want to do, great, do it. It works. It's fine. If you don't want to do that and you would rather, or if you already do that and have a team and would like to dramatically increase your income without hiring or increasing headcount, I'm going to give you some ways to do that do not involve working more hours or billing out more hours. Instead, you just increase your prices, but you have to set prices in the first place. Okay. So I'm going to assume, and I checked in the chat earlier, everybody's basically some kind of service provider. They're either at a firm or they're a coder or they're at a firm. They're either a self-employed coder or they're an in-house or they're at a firm or they're managing a firm, but everybody's kind of, everybody that replied is kind of in the same space. So there are 3 ways that you could continue to provide services that get you away from trading time for money. So you'd stop billing for your time and start pricing your work. So billing and pricing are not the same thing. Billing is in arrears after the fact based on probably hours, but it could be day rates or week rates. That is all a trap. You want to price work. You want to give people prices up front before you start, and then they can make a buying decision, and then you're off to the races. That allows you to create an exponentially increasing margin. That's how you can double your income in 1 year. Okay, so the first thing, everybody's probably doing custom projects. Custom projects I define to be a collaborative enterprise between you and the client of a non-trivial duration. So it's probably 6 months. If it's less than, maybe 3 months, but if it's less than that, it's really not a project. It's just it's like a small thing. I guess it's still a project. It's small if it's very collaborative. But for me, projects were always 6 months or longer. It was like 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, maybe 18 or 2 years. So they were intense. You got to know the client. You probably traveled to their site from time to time, if not being there all the time. And you ended up with a relationship. It was very collaborative. Ideally, it would be a very trusting relationship. And for me, the way to price those things is with value pricing. It's the best way. It's difficult, but it's the best way, most effective way to create prices that are highly profitable for you, but are also profitable to the buyer. There's a mutual profit. And the way value pricing works, it's simple conceptually, but it's very difficult in practice. Conceptually, I'll describe what you currently probably do, and then I'll contrast that with value pricing for a project. So probably what you currently do, or at least what I used to do when I billed by the hour, is that I would get a lead, and when I was the VP, I had to handle the sales. So I'd get hey, client, nice to meet you. Tell me about your project. What is it that you want us to do? And they'd say, well, we know you're a web developer. We know you're a FileMaker developer. We want this list of bells and whistles and features and so on and so forth. In the entire meeting that I was talking to them, I knew that I was going to have to write a proposal after that, and it was going to be an estimate based on how many hours I thought it would take to execute whatever list of features they wanted. So they're basically telling me what to do. They're not the expert, and yet they're telling me what to do. And I need to quickly, in an hour-long conversation, try and get as much scope out of them as possible so that I can take a, take a guess at how many hours, at least an educated guess, at how many hours I thought it would take. And then I'd get back to them with a proposal that said something like, well, we think it's going to be 100 hours and $150 an hour. So that works out to blah, blah, blah. And, but that's just an estimate. So don't hold us to it. And the problem with that is I haven't figured out what their goal is in the meeting. I've spent the entire meeting asking them questions about scope as if I'm going to build some waterfall software project for them. When we all know full well, they're not an expert. They're going to leave stuff out. They're going to forget to do things. To tell me things. There are going to be surprises along the way. It's a joke. I've met a very few number of people, and maybe they're .NET people. I've met very few people who are good in an hour-long meeting of getting a detailed scope for a 6-month to longer project and being able to effectively estimate it and also close the deal. It's very, very hard. It's very rare, I should put it like that. Usually what happens is you get a pretty good idea of the scope. You kind of like guesstimate how long you think it's going to take. You come up with some kind of estimate. Maybe you pad it a little bit, and you kind of subconsciously want to come in low to get the work. And then, well, if you go over, you didn't say it was a price, it was an estimate. So it creates this vicious cycle of people estimating a little bit low to get the job, and then it turns out, oh, what do you know? It was twice as much as we expected. And if you've ever been in that situation, you know that the client doesn't love it. So they end up kind of angry. You feel bad. Everybody feels bad. I do not miss that at all. I love that doesn't happen to me anymore. That's current situation probably for you. The flip side, the value pricing way to do it is when you go into the sales interview, you don't pitch them anything. You don't even care about the scope. You don't really care what they think they need you to do. You're going to have to let them get it off their chest. Otherwise, they'll just be like paralyzed. So you let them tell you like, oh, yeah, we've got this project and we want it to do this and that and the other. It's going to have bells and whistles and a login. And we're going to have an audit trail and it's going to be localized in 10 languages. And you're like, okay. And you're writing down all this stuff. And they're like, can you do it? And you're like, yeah, I can do it. But why do you want to do it? And then you have what I call the why conversation with them. And you go through and you ask them, what's the point? What's the motivation? Why are you doing this at all? Is this important to the business? I don't want to take your money and leave you worse off than I found you. First, do no harm. I want to make sure that I can move the needle for you in a way that is going to improve your business so much that it makes sense to pay me $1 million for this project or whatever. And what that means is the whole conversation, the important part of the conversation in the meeting is not about scope. It's about why. Why do they want this? You need to understand what they think your contribution to this business transformation is. Once you have a sense of that and you're confident that you can do it, then you've got something to base a value price on because you've got an idea of what a home run looks like for them, that this is going to be huge for their business, or it's going to be tiny for their business, but it's going to be something for their business. And that value is roughly, let's call it $100,000 in the first year. So then if it were me, I would say, okay, I'm going to come up with 3 prices that are a fraction of $100,000. So let's say my $100,000 is roughly in the ballpark. What could I do for $10,000 to contribute to that transformation? What could I do for $22,000 to contribute to that outcome? What could I do for $50,000 to contribute to that outcome, the transformation that they want? And then I create the scope. So I pivoted the meeting around from them not talking about features or any of that junk, which they're not even experts at anyway. So why are they even talking about it? It's like a guy who runs a pizza place coming to a designer and giving them advice about what font to use on the website. It's crazy. It doesn't make sense. Don't let them tell you how to do your job. You're not going to tell them how to run their business, and you're not going to let them tell you how to do your job. And good clients are going to love this. If you get bad clients, that's a different thing. But if you have good clients, they're going to love this. And if you figure out what the outcome is worth to them, i.e. the value, the ROI, what's the upside for them, what's the transformation and what is it worth to them roughly, it's not a science, it's an art, then you come up with 3 prices based on the value-based pricing, and then scope last. come up with a scope that you'd be happy to execute at each one of those price points and give them a proposal. So, okay, I could talk about value pricing all day. I should move on to the next thing. But we can talk, I've got plenty of time for questions afterwards if you want. The next thing you could do to stop trading time for money and give prices instead of billing is to create productized services. And a productized service is a relatively fixed scope service, usually fairly short term, a handful of hours across a couple of weeks, give or take, a relatively fixed scope service that you publish at a price on your website. So you present it as a product and you deliver it as a service, productized service. So it looks and feels to the client like a tangible thing. It's got these features, it's got these benefits, it costs this much, there's the price tag right there, it's got this kind of a guarantee, it's going to take this long, it's going to take me as the buyer, it's going to require certain things from me. And it's all laid out in advance. There's no custom proposal, there's no nothing, there's just a price tag. And then there's either a buy now button or an apply now button or a schedule a 15-minute call to see if this is a good fit button. And it completely cuts down on your sales effort. People just come along and they say, well, this seems like a no-brainer. This seems great. I'm going to buy this, or I'm going to ask the person a couple of questions and then I'm going to buy it. So a productized service would be something like doing an application architecture. So let's say you're going to have a target market of like, I don't know, people who run a yoga studio, people run yoga studios and they need some kind of booking solution so that people stop missing appointments, or they need some way to buy gift cards, or they've got this idea for some application, or better yet, yoga studio person has an idea for an application for other yoga studios. Like yoga studio person has an idea for a SaaS for yoga studios. They're going to need a blueprint. They're not going to just hire a developer and start building. If they are, they'd be a terrible client. That would be someone you wouldn't want to work with. But if you're good at what you do, and this yoga studio owner is smart and doesn't want to just start building and throwing money down the drain on something that may or may not work, it'd be like building a house without a blueprint. That would be nuts. So you don't want clients who are nuts. You want clients who do want a blueprint before they build a house. So you could just sort of position yourself as an architect, or have one offering that's positioned as an architectural conversation, where you say, hey, yoga studio owners or karate studio owners or massage therapists, if you got an idea for a SaaS, for $5,000, you can come to me and I'll do the whole architecture for you. Maybe it includes wireframes, maybe it doesn't. But basically the thing is, you'd meet with them, you discuss their business goals, maybe you'd even get into the business model a little bit. How would they bill for it? Okay, I see what's involved. It's going to need a login system. It's going to need this, going to need that, going to need the other. I'd probably use, nopCommerce or Stripe or whatever the components are. And then the deliverable at the end, after a few meetings, is here's your package, here's your pitch deck. Now you can take this and you can get venture funding, or you can use it to find developers, or you can use it to find a technical founder. Or if you would like to do the build, you could say, or I can give you a proposal to build this for you. So this productized service phase, again, it's a relatively fixed scope service that you sell like a product at a published price on your website. And this dramatically, your hours have nothing to do with this. Like the better you get at this, the more productive you get at it, the more boilerplate and codes, like all of the things that you currently probably do anyway to make you faster at your job, suddenly start to increase your profits instead of decreasing your profits, which is what they're doing now. Okay, so that's a productized service. Now the last thing, and this was how I made the bulk of my money for probably the last 10 years, and it was selling subscription to my expertise. And what does that look like? I call it an advisory retainer, and it's not a retainer like a lawyer's retainer, which is just prepayment for a bucket of hours that they use up over some period of time, like use it or lose it monthly hours. This is 24/7 access to my expertise for advice. So if you are perceived as the go-to person in your space at nopCommerce, let's say, I keep using that because that's what we're talking about today. If that's your area of expertise and you're the obvious choice, you're the expert, then maybe you, for $5,000, $10,000 a month, so if somebody has a really high risk, bet the business kind of project that involves nopCommerce, and they've got a couple of .NET developers, but they don't really know nopCommerce, but they're good developers, they could pay you for access to your smarts, hotline to your brain, so that maybe you have a kickoff call, maybe you do, provide some training initial quick training to the developers, maybe you test them and like sort of fill in any gaps they might have initially, and then that client pays you $5, $10, $15,000 a month to answer questions from the CTO or the founder, whoever it is. And you can set it up however you want. Maybe you do code review, pull request. Maybe you review pull requests, or maybe once a month you do like a presentation to their internal team based on what you've been seeing in the last month. But you can create leverage in your business with this. In other words, leverage, it literally means that you'd be applying. You take a application of force and increase the output without, the lever increases your input force, so it increases the output. So there's a million ways that you could do this, but the important thing is with an advisory retainer is that it's 24/7 subscription access to your brain. So you're selling your brain instead of selling your hands, which is probably what you're doing now. Okay. So those are the three big things that I think of when it comes to selling services with a price tag instead of with an hourly estimate. So again, it's value pricing for custom projects. It's creating productized services and selling subscriptions like advisory retainers. There's this whole other thing I won't even talk about, but you'll be familiar with, which is you can sell info products and courses and workshops and plugins and apps and tools to developers and a million other things that, educational things or info product things or all of these other things that are basically no touch sales, no touch delivery. Somebody just clicks a buy now button and you have $100. Somebody clicks a buy now button and you have $500. Somebody clicks a buy now button and you have 10 more bucks. So it's the selling while you sleep model. If you're good at what you do and you're an expert and you're sort of well known as an expert at this particular thing, then you can do that. And it's usually small dollar amounts compared to like a custom project. I mean, you could easily have a 6-figure custom project. And, am I really going to spend 3 months writing a book that I'm going to sell for $10? Well, maybe you will, because that book, once you write it, you never have to write it again. So assuming you do it in a reasonably evergreen way, and it's not going to be invalidated as soon as the next version of nopCommerce comes out, if you do it in a design pattern way or something that's not going to change every 6 months, that book is like an annuity. It's just money in the bank that continues to deliver income to you with you doing nothing. So so I won't talk about products too much because that's a pretty big leap from selling, services or billing yourself by the hour to code. Okay, so the last thing I'll touch on real quick is how would you get started with this? How would you shift over to, if we assume that right now you're sending out hourly estimates for project type work, custom development, hourly estimate, let's get started. Hopefully we'll hit the estimate. If that kind of describes your world, the first thing I would do would be to start getting a taste for fixed pricing, but you don't want to do it in a dangerous way. I know I've talked to a million people who have dabbled with fixed pricing, and they always do it in a time and materials basis, and they set their prices way too low, so they always get killed. Because in that scope meeting, they only get about half of the real scope. They set an estimate, and then they give that as a price. Maybe they mark it up a little bit, and they say, oh, here's a fixed price. Or even worse, you do hourly not to exceed, which is the worst of all possible arrangements for you. But let's say you've dabbled with fixed pricing, and you said, I think it'll be about $10,000. I estimate it would be 10,000 hours. So I'll do a fixed price for 12,000. And you end up getting killed, and you're like, I'm never doing that again. That's crazy. So the next time, if you do want to start to transition in this direction, and start to get the feel for making more money by being better, which seems like it should be the normal way, then here's what I would do. I would not do anything differently in your sales meeting. However your leads come in, however you do it exactly the same. Have the same kind of scopy conversation in the sales meeting, just like normal. The difference will be when you go to write the proposal. Normally, you'd probably say, I talked to you about this. There's going to be all these features. It's going to have all these things in it. This is the stuff that I captured in my notes. And we believe that it's going to be $10,000, but that's just an estimate. So we charge this much per hour. We believe that it's going to take $10,000 worth of hours to complete this. And then here's the new thing. That's the normal thing. The new thing is, or we'll guarantee you that we'll finish all of this stuff for $18,500. So an 85% premium. Not quite double, but pretty close to double. And if you go and do that and you say, and you think, oh yeah, I'll do this for 18. I think the estimate's about $10,000. And now Stark wants me to add on a fixed price option to do all this stuff for 18,500. If your reaction to that when you try and do it is, oh no way, I'll get killed if I only add 85% on top of the estimate, what does that tell you? That should tell you that your estimate's way too low, because you are not even confident that you're within roughly double. You're afraid that the scope is so wrong that this client is going to drag you through the mud more than double what you're estimating. So here's what you do. You go back and you adjust your estimate so that it will produce a number 85% higher that you can live with. See what I mean? So you're like, maybe that pulls you up to $15,000 for your estimate. And I don't know what the math is, but $22,000 for your fixed price. And you stand behind that fixed price. That should scare you a little bit. You know why? Because now you're taking the risk. And you might ask yourself, why would a client pick that when it is so much more money? And the answer is because they don't want that risk. Every client you've ever worked with by the hour has felt this horrible risk that you might be bad at estimating. And especially if it turns out you were bad at estimating. And they hate it. Clients hate paying by the hour. If you're talking to a business owner or somebody that has control of a budget, they can't stand it because it's like this leak in their checking account and they never know when it's going to close. If you can guarantee a price, that a lot of business owners are going to love that. They're like, yeah, I'll take that any day, because the premium that they're paying is an insurance policy so that they either aren't going to run out of budget, they're not going to run out of runway, or they're not going to have to go back to their boss for more money. That is worth a lot to a lot of people. It's to good clients. To bad clients, you don't want bad clients anyway. But if you're attracting good clients who respect what you do and they trust you, you have a reputation, they'll jump on this. Once you start to get the feeling of working on these fixed price projects, you're going to be like, ooh, I don't feel like I'm getting killed, but I still price this too low, because the benefit that they're getting out of this $22,000 project is astronomical. They like increased business by $2 million last year based on this solution I built them. Next time a client comes down the pike, you're going to do a better job with a value conversation. If you want to keep doing project work, you're going to do a better job finding out what it's worth to them. Why are they doing it? What is the transformation that they want? And then you can set those three prices, like I said, in your proposal as a fraction of that number, and then decide on the scope last. Okay, so I think that's everything I had. The transition move is to just do this one thing differently. If you want to try it on a small project. Don't take a huge risk. Try it on a smallish project that you're going to estimate by the hour, and then take your hourly estimate, multiply it by 85%. And if you're comfortable with that number, you send that proposal to the client with the two options. We guess it's going to be 10,000, or we promise it'll be 18,500. And I think you'll be surprised. A lot of clients are going to pick the higher one. Okay, cool. I have no idea how long I've been talking, so I'm going to shut up. I'm probably late. And see if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah, there is the one question. How do you limit your time with an advisory retainer?
You don't. You charge enough so that you do not care. Another thing that you can do to if you're nervous about that, another thing you can do is make sure that the person who's buying it is the highest level. It's like your contact should be, you should only sell this to high level people. So it should be like a CTO, founder, CIO, someone up there. These people are busy. They are not going to bother you sitting on the phone telling you about their divorce. They are going to only call you when they need something, and they're going to want a quick answer. That's the thing. You're on call. So you need to have a really quick answer. It needs to be like, during business hours, probably 90-minute turnaround. If it's overnight, then definitely next day. At least get back to them and say, I don't have the answer off the top of my head, but I'm going to research it and I'll get back to you by tomorrow morning. And people will pay $10,000 a month to have the bat phone that they can call you on.
How granular are the scopes you define?
I'm not very granular. My proposal template is 5 pages long. I don't think I've ever had a longer one. I've written $3 million proposals in 5 pages. The thing you focus on is the benefits, the outcome. What are we trying to achieve here? We're trying to transform the retail experience using a augmented reality iPhone app. Why? Because our business is in the toilet, Amazon's crushing us, and we need to fire half of our in-store staff without degrading the customer experience. So, okay, so what customer experience? How are we going to measure the customer experience? Well, we have these net promoter scores, or we have this metric right now. We just want to make sure that metric doesn't go down. It's like, okay, so I will keep that metric the same. I will contribute to keeping that metric where it is now or improving it with this new system. And then all of the decisions that I would make as like an augmented reality, mobile developer are my decisions to make, because I'm on the hook to keep that number the same as the in-store staff gets laid off or whatever. So you focus on the benefits. What is the success metric? What's the success metric for this option? And you find that out when you're talking to them, and then you put it in the proposal. They're measuring something. That's why they're talking to you. They know something's wrong.
And a little bit more to that, on your proposal, you state that you really should have 3 different options.
Always, exactly 3, always. Mm-hmm.
And how would you categorize those 3 different options? Would they be like different levels of how they could work with you, or how
Small,
would you?
medium, and large.
Okay.
Yep. So, and generally I want to go with Goldilocks pricing, which is what I described here, where you get 1x is option 1, 2.2x is option 2, and 5x or 10x is option 3. So option 3 is the high price anchor, and it makes option 2 look affordable. And they're like, well, we might as well do option 2 if we're not going to, people want to choose the middle option. So that's usually the curve I would use. It goes like this. It gets the velocity increases, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah.
But I also talk about might as well pricing, where you just really want the gig and you don't want to leave much money on the table. So you make them the deltas smaller as they go up. So they're like, well, we might as well get 3. So, but generally I like the Goldilocks pricing, where they're driven to option 2, and the whole thing would be anchored in the introduction to the proposal in the situation appraisal, where you say, look, if this works, you stand to increase annual revenue by $2 million. So like they open up the proposal, they scan for dollar signs, they see $2 million. Are you kidding me? And then the options are like 20,000, 50,000, and 100,000. And they're like, oh, that's totally reasonable for that. Totally reasonable investments for that kind of an outcome.
So is that first option sometimes the advisory retainer itself?
I wouldn't put a retainer in there because it's ongoing. You could say something like 6. I want to give a fixed price. I want all the prices to be of the same type. So in a situation like this, I would say you could say 6 months of advisory services, and then after that we could go month to month. But I'd make it so that it could be a scope that I put inside of a fixed number, not a recurring number. Or if I am going to do recurring, all 3 of them will be recurring, so that they can compare apples to apples between my 3 options.
Here's a few more questions in there. Do you find pushback or a conflict between value-based pricing and agile development?
No, not at all. So agile, if you want to use agile or waterfall or whatever you want to use, is up to you. If you think that that's going to get you to the success criteria faster, then do it. Yeah,
I guess I wonder if there's a little more to that question, because there's a lot of development shops that they're implementing agile processes. It's kind of like a big mission, to where if you're wanting to give something that's value based, but internally, they're wanting to do things in an agile way. They want you to be part of stand-ups every morning.
Yeah.
For you to be, in a way, that outsider providing this, this project at a price, but they want to pull you in on daily stand-ups and usually like status reports. Yeah. How would you address something like that?
You still have to, you just have to find a goal. If you can't find a goal, you can't do value pricing. So nobody wants to have a daily stand-up as a goal. It's a tactic. What's the objective? What is the overall objective? Why are we doing this at all? Why not do this project? Like, if people want to Google the why conversation, Jonathon Stark, you can find a ton of information about this. But you have to ask them why they want to do it. Why do this? Why do it now? Why hire someone expensive like me when you could have a million other options? And you get them to answer all those questions. If they can't, then maybe they need a productized service. Maybe they need to go with someone else. Maybe they would be a bad fit for you. But if they can, and you're like, oh, okay, I see the business. You have to think like a business owner. So you think like, well, how am I going to improve their condition? not like how am I going to do what they say. If you're good at what you do, if you're new and you don't know what you're doing and you're just like good at .NET, then fine, bill by the hour. I don't care, because you're not going to be able to have these like, you know, you're not going to be sick of it yet. You're going to enjoy coding so much that you're not going to care. You can be like, dude, I just made $150 for coding. You know, that's fine. Do that. But eventually you're going to get sick of that, because you're going to get stuck in this hourly trap when you're like, I'm delivering massive value to these clients and they're paying me like a cab driver. When you start to get that feeling, you'll be ready to have these conversations. And you just go, why do you want to even do this? Why not do this? This is going to be a huge, risky operation. And even if I was working for free, your entire team is now going to have 2 full-time jobs instead of 1. Why would you even do this? Why not just, instead of building all this software, why not just hire 100 admins and do it manually? It's like, oh, that's, you know, if they said, yeah, that's a good idea, then that's what they should do. But they won't.
Yeah. I like Alan's comment. I wish I had this thought or this idea 20 years ago. And I kind of feel the same way. You know, kind of a little bit more onto that. And you might be able to share some advice on this, Jonathan, to where, you know, I've been doing contract work for about 10 plus years. And when I first got into doing contract work, I was excited that I was kind of going to bill by the hour. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because as a salary employee, you know, you find yourself getting taken advantage for your time. You know, you're putting in 50, 60 hours a week and getting paid the same, whether you're happy with that salary or not. So in a way, 10 years ago, I was crazy excited, and I liked that whole discipline at first of getting paid hourly. But for everything that you already talked about, you know, you started to go through me the last 10 years. So, you know, there are definitely probably even a good number of attendees even in this meetup that are full-time employees that are looking at doing stuff on the side. And, you know, whether they're looking at doing a true transition of not being an employee anymore and going and taking on side projects and making that full-time.
Yep.
What's some of your advice to those people looking at taking on work part-time? In other words, when it comes to like payment, when it comes to just a lot of different aspects of what you're touting.
So it can be tricky too. It can be tricky because some people need to do this kind of under the radar because they don't want to freak out their employer, and there's all those sorts of things. I mean, I had one corporate job in my entire life where I was like worked at Staples headquarters I was a DBA, and when I look back at that job, I could have started a complete side hustle at that business because it was really, really slow. Like I could get my stuff done so fast that we were playing Unreal Tournament for hours every day. It was like ridiculous. So hopefully they're not listening. But we got our stuff done. And we came in on the weekends when it was needed, you know, because tech stuff, redo the servers or whatever. So, you know, it seemed fair to me. But when I look back on it, it was like a country club compared to running your own business. So if I was back in the country club, I would start with info products, I would start with productized services, and I would not start by billing myself out as a pair of hands by the hour or even by the project to a client. It's too much of a commitment. And it's also probably pretty threatening to your employer if they care. So I would just come up with I'd probably start a mailing list. I'd create a lead magnet. I'd start attracting names to my list. Maybe I'd do some sort of info product on the side. Maybe it's training for other people like me, or maybe it's, or maybe you go after a vertical or some sort of target market like dentists or yoga studio owners or something. And you say, hey, here's how to automate between Google Forms or whatever platform they use, like MindBody. Here's how to integrate between MindBody and MailChimp or something that doesn't already exist, and create a inexpensive info product and just be selling that automated on the side. I wouldn't even do services.
Okay. Well, let's say they did get an option for a service. What are some aspects about like payment and timelines and things like that, you know, you have your full-time job, and it is easy to get caught up into, hey, I got this side work that's going to bring in all this extra money, whatever that might be. What are some aspects about, you know, when it comes to the payment on proposal and just timelines and what you can really guarantee without killing yourself? You know, here you are working 40 plus hours already, and you're about to take on more work.
Yeah, hopefully you're not married if you're going to do that. But you know, I was definitely young and living off pizza at one time, and I would have been happy to have like a 20-hour a week side job for sure. So if I was going to do that, first off, I would look for project work, and I would try and come up with why do you need this done? Come up with a value and price it. Because if you give somebody a price, you say it's going to be $25,000. Like, try and make the projects as small as possible, because if you're taking all the risk, you want to minimize it. So try and break every project into phases. Do the smallest possible project that you can instead of the biggest, which is another mindset flip. Smallest possible project, break off the beginning chunk, price that, and then we'll move from there. Price it in phases, and just do it as a fixed price. You know, if you aren't afraid of that, you'll get the money. And if you give them a price, you can ask for it up front. All of my proposals would have, like, unless they're gargantuan and I was afraid to have all the money, I would say, yeah, it's 100% upfront. Schedule this in my calendar. If you want to get started, here's how to make payment. And, you know, it was $100,000. It'd be like, yeah, $100,000 upfront to block out the time in my calendar. And they'll probably negotiate with you on that, but that's fine. You can negotiate the payment plans. It's better than negotiating the price itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so you just take the risk. But if you're really junior, you're probably not going to do a great job at it. But that's okay, because you've got full-time income anyway. So it's a great, safe way to practice doing this. And maybe end up making $30 an hour when you really wanted to make $70 an hour effectively, because it took you twice as long as you expected. But who cares? Like, your client's going to love you the whole time because their bill is not spiraling out of control. They're going to love you. And you have no fights with them. The only problem is you're like, I really wish I could have finished this faster. So what does that do to your motivation? You figure out how to do better stuff faster, whether that means ask better questions of the client up front, or invest in tools, or buy plugins, or take classes. All of these things will have a benefit to you because you're giving fixed prices. So it's a pretty safe way to experiment with it. You'll probably screw up the first 3 times, but then after that, that's your education, and you got paid to get it. So, so what? It took you twice as long as you expected. You'll be better next time.
And if they don't want to pay 100% up front, let's say they do, like, it's common to do 50-50. And they're going to say, well, 50% now and then 50% when it's done, or when there is a sign off per se.
Yeah.
What do you usually say to that on that? Let's say you're okay with 50-50, but
right.
When is done?
Right. So I would say, well, we could talk about that, but I don't want to tie you to sign off, because I don't want to tie the final payment to sign off, because that's going to put pressure on both of us to sign off too soon before it may really be done. So if you sign off and then it turns out in 3 months there's some quarterly report that doesn't run the way we expected, well, you're going to have to pay me again to come back and fix it. But instead, what I'd rather do is say 50% up front, and then 50% in, depending on how long the project you think it's going to be, let's say 50% in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, be 30% up front, and then 50% up front, and then 50% on some specific date in the future that is not tied to sign off. At that point, they're going to know if they're happy with what's going on, and they can either kill the project at that point because you're terrible and you overestimated your abilities, but that's almost definitely not going to happen. What probably will happen is they'll just pay it because that was the deal. And then you just keep going until they're happy, because the goal of a value-based project, and really all projects, is 100% customer satisfaction. And if you set yourself up with these financial incentives that are aligned with the client, you're going to get better and better over time at delivering 100% customer satisfaction faster and faster and faster as your prices keep going up and up and up. How do you learn this? You learn it the hard way, but you're never going to learn it if you're billing by the hour.
And I don't know if you said it directly, but that is, part of that is that bug-free guarantee. You're not really trying to charge more for fixing something or anything like that.
Right. I'm sure everyone listening to this would be embarrassed if they had a show-stopping bug in their code.
Right.
And they would be, unless their boss said, no, you can't fix it for free, we have to bill them for it, or a change order, or blah, blah, blah. You want to fix it. So why not just build that into the price up front and say, hey, once this launches, we'll give you a 12-month bug-free guarantee. If there are any bugs that happen, I'll fix them for free. And what does that do? That gives you an incentive to comment your code and refactor your code and do things in a way that is going to be easy to maintain long-term, because you're on the hook. So look at what we're talking about. This is back to the Fred and Barney thing. You're creating a financial incentive for you to be and get, if you're not already good. You're creating a financial incentive to get and be better at what you do. And when you do get and be better at what you do, you get paid more. Your
Yeah.
profits are higher and your fees are higher. So if you just never do that, then you're basically just, doing best practices, and you get your fingers crossed that the ultimate amount that they pay you is less than it was worth to them. But you won't find out until it's too late if you do it like that.
Yeah, we definitely got a lot of questions popping in the chat. I was just
hang.
kind of, let's see. I'm going to go about all the way up to Eric's question. I found this to work as a solo. Do you see big teams doing this?
It absolutely works for big teams. The trick is transitioning call it an hourly based agency over to a value price model, because in general, the entire business products, the systems, the processes, the incentives, the estimation, the invoicing, everything is based on this presumption of a billable hour. So it is a major surgery to the agency to switch over whole hog from the way that things work. I mean, the whole culture has to change. All of a sudden, your least valuable employees become your most, and vice versa. So everything changes. So that is definitely hard. Is it doable? Yes. Do you need to switch to value pricing? No. You can switch to productized services. That's way easier. That you leave money on the table. You could get more money with value pricing than with productized services, but it's much easier. It's very easy to sell in comparison. You don't have to get good at the why conversation, and you can start disconnecting your time from money and realizing real profits.
So you addressed a little bit of this one from John. By concrete example, I know he was looking for some examples. He was looking for probably some more concrete examples on the three choices that you present in a proposal. Like I mentioned, would the advisory retainer be part of that? You said, no, not really. That's a separate thing. But and you might have stated this already, but when it comes to that, of those three proposals or those three choices in your proposal, is it typically that middle one that you're expecting, or you're really driving for to get? And do you, how do you look at those three different offerings?
Well, if you follow my advice and do scope last, then you kind of don't care which one they pick, because they're all a win for you. So you want them to pick whichever one's the best for them. But you've set the scope such that the amount of money that you are going to charge for it is, you're happy to do it for that amount of money. A classic, in terms of the concrete examples, a classic one for developer would be to say, option one is kind of like the strategic planning, architecture, design phase. So you do this, all the upfront, all the really fun discovery and the planning. So, to use a building metaphor, it's you doing the blueprint. You're making the blueprint for the house. And phase two could be, I will, do the blueprint for the house, and that's, call it $10,000 just for round numbers. Level two is, I'll create the blueprint for you, and I will oversee your developers as they implement it. It should probably take about 6 months. Maybe it'll take 12 months, but whatever. You pick a price that you're happy to do it for, and you'll just oversee the developers, not manage them, not manage the project. You're not going to know these developers' names necessarily. You're just going to check their work, and you're going to answer questions if something happens that is totally a surprise. And you'll be there as that sort of like brain in the room to make sure that it's not going to go off the rails. So you're the insurance policy. You just provide oversight, and that is usually going to look like, weekly meeting and maybe some questions in a Slack room or whatever. But it's usually, but it's oversight. It's not management. It's two different things. And then the third option would be, client, you don't have to worry about it. I'll get the people. I'll manage the people. I'll pay the people. Everything. And then that's like astronomically more expensive, because now you're paying for the people and you're on the hook for everything. It might actually be easier for you in some ways, because you're not going to have to deal with their team. It might be less, fewer unknowns if you already have a team that you're comfortable with. So option three might be the one that you want to drive them toward, and you're not interested in the oversight one in the middle. But that's a common one. It's sort of like, think of it like the architecture model. So like, I'll be the architect. That's option one. I'll be the architect, and I'll walk the job site while the general contractor is building the house. That's option two. And option three is I will be the architect and the general contractor, and I'll get all the carpenters and all of that other stuff. And
I gotcha.
Yeah, so that price would be dramatically higher.
That's a good way to look at it. Let's see. Ryan has a question. Do you ever have an escape hatch where you or the customer can terminate the engagement if it becomes obvious that the goals are not that the goals are unattainable?
So this has never happened to me in. There's a couple of things to talk about here. First of all, I have refunded people's money early in a project. So a typical example would be, I get approached by a buyer. I meet with the buyer. I like the buyer. I understand the goals the buyer has. I'm confident that I can achieve those goals. You want to be confident, otherwise you're putting yourself in this risk. So like this fear that this person has, Ryan, I probably wouldn't take that job on. I want to know I'm going to hit a hit a slam dunk. That's how much of a sports guy I am. I want to know that I can do a slam dunk, or at least be pretty sure. It would need to be a giant surprise, because we're talking about business outcomes. We're talking about things that are easily measurable. I'm not talking about some number of features. They don't get to tell me what features to build. We're going to achieve this goal. You want to increase revenue. You want to decrease bounce rate. You want to increase internal morale. You want to increase adoption. These are all things that you can measure. So I want to find something that I can measure that even their CFO is going to understand, not just their CTO. I want to have a business outcome that any 6-year-old could understand. And if I'm confident that I can hit that, then yeah. So back to my example, I'll get that confidence with the buyer. And then this has happened more than once. In a kickoff meeting, CEO rolls into the room and they're a complete monster. And what they want is different. They're a terrible communicator, real bully. And I just here's your money back. I'm not doing this. It's a disaster. Obviously it's going to be a disaster. And I've done that a couple of times. I can think of one time when I actually put in maybe 40 or 80 hours of work on something. And finally I was just I thought this was feasible. I was looking at it as a fun way to learn a new technology and get paid for it. Turned out it wasn't feasible, and I gave them their money back because it was my fault. Why wouldn't you give their money back?
Scott's posted a link to the different Ditcherville cartoons that you've been posting. So those have been actually quite the learning experience, just even and kind of entertaining at the same time, which is nice. All right, here's a question, Thomas. Would you bill OPEX? I'm confused by that question. I don't know if you know what that means.
Where is it?
It's right after the link to the Ditcherville on Twitter.
When is it done? When would you bill operational expense? I think.
Gotcha. Okay.
I would. First of all, I don't bill. I would say it's upfront here. It's $100,000. If you.
Yeah, I think it still comes down to it's about just giving the price.
Yeah, it's a price. Here you go. Take it or leave it. And it's 3 prices. In the case of a project, it's actually 3 prices. So it's not an ultimatum. It's which one of these is the best fit. And they can, compare and contrast the deltas between each of the options, the benefits of each option, and the price for each one, and they can make a decision. If they get cranky about anything, it's almost always going to be the 100% upfront request. So fine, negotiate that all day long, but don't change your prices.
Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with customers that want to gold plate everything? They want to have the carousel on the homepage, things like that.
Yeah, so that does happen where you're in there and you're working on the website, and the sales guy comes running in, the VP of sales or the director, whatever, the American sales lead comes in and he's like, our competitors just put a carousel on the homepage. We should put a carousel on the homepage. And then your salvation to managing scope creep is to say, okay, we could do that. How does that contribute to the stated goal of this project? And if they can make a case for it, then you're going to want to do it. In this example, they won't be able to make a case for it because it's silly. And so you'd say, well, we can't make a case for this contributing to our stated outcome. And I say this up front, and I am here to be just like a mad dog at protecting this project. My whole reason for being here is to make sure that this project is a success. So I'm going to say no to things. If you have a request that doesn't clearly and directly contribute to the stated goal, then we'll put it on a list for version 2 and we'll revisit it after we declare victory on this project. But getting distracted by shiny objects along the way is a surefire way to have scope creep, to blow the deadline, to screw up the project. So at the beginning, and I do this in the beginning, I'd say that right in the sales meeting. I'd be like, FYI. In fact, the mere reality of me pushing back on them in the sales meeting, being like, why do you guys even want to do this? Why would you pay someone like me to do this? It shows that I'm not desperate for the work. I'm not going to take their orders, and I'm going to be an expert, and they're going to love that. The good clients are going to love that because they recognize that I'm not here to take their money. I'm here to make their business better. And if they have to give me $1 million, that hurts their business. So how am I going to make their business more than $1 million better? I need to figure that out. So yeah, I just set the tone up front. Be like, look, you're not going to tell me what to do, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. But if you come into my house and tell me to put a carousel on the homepage, I reserve the right to veto that.
Makes sense. I was like, Bob's going to buy your book. I highly recommend the audio version. I'm a horrible reader, and I bought your book, Jonathon, early on, and I really didn't get to it until you had the audio version.
Oh, good. That's good.
I probably have listened to it quite a few, probably about 10 times. So it's definitely worth it.
It's short. Yeah.
It's short. Yeah, that's the best part. You can absorb the whole thing on a long walk, which is great. So highly recommend that. Let's see. You covered the 3 options quite a bit. So I think,
and there is a template on my website. If you go to jonathonstark.com/free, there's a bunch of free stuff. And one of them is the 5-page proposal template.
Pretty rough on CFOs.
I just meant non-technical. You know what I mean?
And let's see, per transaction. I'm not sure what that question is referring to.
What 3 options? He was talking about, I think he was in relation to the what are the 3 options? The 3 options are the 3 incremental small, medium, and large options in the project proposal.
All right. I don't see any other questions out there. If we send you $10, can you send us the audio version?
Of what? Of this? This is going to be on YouTube, right? So
yeah, this is going to be out on YouTube. So yeah. Well, Jonathon, I don't see any more questions. Oh, here. This is a good one from Eric. Do you stay within a niche?
Yeah, I mean, that's a positioning question. So real quick, like I'm working on a new book called Ditching Hourly. I have an entire huge section on this. It's positioning is niching is a way to position yourself. It's one way. So you could have a horizontal specialization, you can have a vertical specialization, you can have a demographic, a psychographic, a platform specialization. There's all these different ways to make the pond that you're in smaller. You don't want to try to be everything to everyone. It does not work. It is really, really hard to attract clients when you're just swimming around in the ocean. But if you jump into a pond where you're actually pretty big, it makes it much easier for people to become aware of you and to begin to trust you. If someday it turns out that you grow too big for the pond, just jump to a bigger one. But if you're not getting leads right now, if you're getting like 1 lead a month or a year, you need to niche down or specialize or somehow position yourself in the mind of your ideal buyer. There's like a million ways to do it, but what you're doing when you come up with a positioning statement is you're making yourself more memorable. If you can't make yourself more memorable, your friends can't refer you to people who you could help. Your potential clients aren't gonna even understand what you do. They're not gonna know how you're different than anyone else. They're not gonna think of you when the perfect problem that you could solve crops up. Positioning helps you become more memorable. So there's a bunch of different kinds of positioning statements. I talk about 3 in the book. There's like an A for B where it's like I do .NET for dentists, or I do .NET for libertarians, or I do .NET for environmentalists. That's like I do X for Y, or I do A for B. And then I have an XY positioning statement, which is a little bit of a step up, where you help people with a thing, but you don't even talk about .NET. You say, I don't know, what's an outcome for .NET? Like if you're a massage therapist, I would say, I help professional athletes get back into the game after being sidelined with an injury. I didn't say I was a massage therapist. I said, I help professional athletes get back in the game after being sidelined by an injury. if somebody knows a professional athlete or is a professional athlete or even is a college or high school athlete that has an injury, they're going to want to talk to me. How do you do that? That's the question they're going to ask. So if you focus on an expensive problem that you solve for a target market, they will start talking to you. I call it like t-shirt marketing. If you show up at a barbecue with a t-shirt that says, I help professional athletes get back in the game, any professional athlete there is going to come up to you and strike up a conversation. So if you come up with I don't know what it is in the .NET world, like what thing, I help Microsoft Stack businesses create e-commerce websites or something. I don't know what it is, to sell stuff online. But if you pick a target market and you're aware of them, of an expensive problem that they have that you can solve like with .NET somehow, then you could just talk about that. And then the third kind of positioning statement is kind of like the all singing, all dancing, laser focused positioning statement, where you say, I am a discipline who helps target market with an expensive problem. Unlike my competitors, unique difference. So that's would be a guiding positioning statement for your entire marketing effort. But I mean, so short answer, yes, niching down is almost always a good thing. It's almost impossible to over niche. So yeah, I would say do it.
And a little more to that, actually. So what's kind of funny is that, finding a niche of, like you said, dentist, where you're creating software for dentists or whatever that group of people would be. Mm-hmm. So like right now, if you search for nopCommerce, it's funny that I'm usually I'm on the first page of results.
Yeah, it's a platform specialization.
Exactly. And in many ways, that's cool to be a platform specialist, but I'll be honest with you, I think it's kind of taken me away some other opportunities of being more of a e-commerce specialist or someone that's really kind of a not so focused on nopCommerce. In other words, it kind of makes sense even to have like, a solution built around, let's say, nopCommerce for this kind of operation, this kind of storefront, someone that sells shoes or something like that. I think it's so, specializing in a platform is good, but I think you're actually, like what you stated, Jonathon, if you find that group that really needs an offering of sorts, that's probably a better place to start when it comes to thinking about a niche to pick.
Could be. I mean, I could go on. I mean, platform specialization in 30 seconds. It's great if you're new to the platform and it's on the rise. If you're late to the platform or it's not on the rise, it's bad. So if it's on the way up and you're an early adopter, then you're going to benefit from all the marketing they do. So you don't have to be good at marketing. True. Right. Yeah. You showed a slide earlier when the founder, you're talking to the founder. Right. So the problem with it is there's pros and cons to everything. People need to know they want nopCommerce before they even start searching for it. Mm-hmm. That's one problem. Another problem is they can search for nopCommerce on TopTal and 99 Designs or Fiverr or wherever else and get a sorted list by hourly rate. So, you need to be like the worldwide expert with a book and you speak and tour and all of these things. You need to be famous as the nopCommerce guy. And then people who need the nopCommerce guy will come to you and you can charge a pretty penny because of all the reasons I talked about today, because the value that they get from you is really good. So are you missing out on opportunities? No, not necessarily. I mean, yeah, you're missing out on things. You're always going to miss out on things. Yeah. Everything is like, is it a distraction or an opportunity is the question. Mm-hmm. So if you just like follow whoever wants to work with you, then I would say you're just getting distracted and not doing anything. But that's not the point you were making. The point you were making was, what if I didn't focus on the platform and instead focused on the desired business outcome and I could focus on them? That's a niche instead of a specialization, which is focusing on me. So my specialization is kind of like my resume, my skill sets, all of the things that I'm good at. A niche is me deciding who I want to serve. And if you decide who you want to serve, it makes all of your marketing efforts way easier. Because you can just talk to them. You don't have to guess at how am I going to market myself. You just ask them, what do you need? And they say, oh, we need this. And you're like, great, I can make a productized service for that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, no complaints for myself focusing on a platform. It just, it kind of like, it's really good to ask yourself, which is more important to you? Do you really like that platform or do you really like that group of people? Right. Because it's a long haul. I mean, I've been working with nopCommerce for 3-4 years and, it's now is where, I kind of stand out and getting found in searches. So it's something you really want to think about for the long haul.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's definitely a couple more questions popping in now. Niche type sounds good and useful concept. Are the types described in your book? Different kinds of niches.
Useful. I would start with my mailing list. I honestly don't remember. No, I don't think I talk about different types of niches. If you go to the Business of Authority podcast,
Yep.
there's an episode on how to specialize. But also go to, if you go to that page of my site, jonathonstark.com/free, there's an archive of my mailing list that has like 1,500 posts, and you could just search in page for specialization or niche or positioning, and a whole bunch of stuff's going to come up for free. But there's another question here that's really good. How much time do you spend on direct revenue work versus marketing, getting leads, stuff that builds your position? Any advice on this? This always drives people like their heads explode. But you should, if you are running your own business, and if you're a freelancer or a contractor or a consultant, you are running a business. You're not an external employee, like an employee with no benefits. You should be spending 20 hours a week on marketing. And that's going to sound crazy to somebody who's billing by the hour, because they're like, that's losing $2,000 or $50,000, whatever, $5,000 a week. And that's why you probably don't do any marketing, because you feel like you're not getting paid for it. But if you're not getting leads every single week, you're going to have a really hard time closing big deals. It's just math. So you need to be making enough money in 20 hours a week so that you can spend the other 20 hours doing fun stuff like creating screencasts of nopCommerce and doing meetups and speaking at conferences, whether it's virtual or in person, or writing a book, or it's all fun stuff to do. Like marketing is just like writing stuff and publishing it. It's fun. Maybe you don't like writing prose. Maybe you don't like making videos. Make an open source project. Build plugins for nopCommerce. It's all content marketing if you want to think of it like that. You're just helping people for free. So it's super fun if you can afford to do it. But yeah, you should be doing at least 10 hours a week, at least 1 day a week on marketing. If you're not doing a day a week on marketing, you don't even have a business. You're just staff aug, which is like, why not just get a job? I don't get it.
And Thomas, I'm aware of that Serenity link. So yeah, for developers, that is a pretty cool framework to check out when it comes to building apps. And I think that might be it. How are we doing? Yeah,
It looks like it's the middle of the night here. What time is it? It's so dark.
It's getting dark here in Central Time.
All right. Well, if anybody wants to email me, the email is on it's jstark@jonathonstark.com. It's on the event page. You can go to that page, that free page on my site, and there's tons of stuff there if you want to go deeper on either value pricing or how to write a proposal or how to create a productized service, or there's a million things there.
Mm-hmm. And join his mailing list. You will get an email every day. That's a little bit of something that's useful. So it's probably one of the few emails that I actually keep and kind of look back at. So yeah, highly recommend joining the mailing list too.
Cool. Well, thanks to everybody for staying so long. I feel like I don't know if we've gone over or we're in time still.
It's about the normal time.
Okay.
But yes, this of course we recorded this. Looks like the recording's still going. No one accidentally turned it off. And this will be uploaded to YouTube later today. And I will post the link in the meetup post for the link to YouTube. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Jonathon. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.